Okay, good evening. We are delighted to have with us tonight Al Taylor, KN3U, who will give us an overview of the Montgomery County Auxiliary Communication Service, or simply MCACS. Al is a longtime champion of amateur radio and a cornerstone of emergency communications in our community. In addition to his leadership with MCACS, Al also serves as the ARES Emergency Coordinator for Montgomery County. Al embodies the very spirit of service that defines amateur radio. With decades of experience both behind the microphone and in the field, he brings a rare blend of technical expertise and calm, mission-focused leadership. His work has been instrumental in strengthening coordination between amateur radio operators and local emergency management, ensuring that when conventional systems falter, the message still gets through. So thanks, Al, for joining us tonight. And now it is over to you.
Wow. Well, thanks, Alex. And I'd really like to meet this guy. So good evening, friends and future friends. Let me clean up my screen here. I hope you're seeing a slide that says MCACS on it.
Not seeing it yet.
Oh, you're not? Heavens. What did I do? Let me just click share again. Select the screen. Let's try that.
That's
Okay, thank you. So let me just get started here. I'll talk a little bit tonight about what ARES and MCACS are for the new hams in the group. I want to touch on the question, is there still a role for hams in emergency communications in 2026? And that will kind of lead into some talk about what are the threats that we face in this area and how that identification of threats guides what we do to prepare. So, and it's not going to be kind of a linear presentation, but that's kind of the three things that I want to touch on tonight. So, who am I? Alex didn't mention it, but I've been a member of Montgomery County ARES and its predecessors since 1978, and I've been a member of the MARC Club since 1978. I've served on the board for a number of years in the prehistoric past. I'm an electrical engineer by profession. Most of my work is involved in design of mission critical systems. I've had a pretty varied career, now retired. And I've had, at this point, almost 50 years of active involvement in emergency management field, starting as a volunteer in ARES here in Montgomery County, again, back in the 70s. And based on some of the things that I got involved with as a volunteer, in the early 90s, I was deployed to Miami following Hurricane Andrew as a volunteer to support communications for the federal medical teams that were sent to the area. And after that assignment, I was hired by the U.S. Public Health Service as their telecom and information management officer. So I was a paid full-time federal disaster for several years in the 1990s. And now another 20 odd, almost 30 years on, I'm back to being a volunteer at the local level again. So I have had quite a bit of involvement on the ground in disasters and disaster response here in the local area and around the country and in the Caribbean on a couple of occasions. So that kind of informs what I'll be saying. So I usually, when I want to talk about ARES and ACS and RACES, we always start from the FCC regulations for amateur radio, Part 97. The very beginning of that document It states that the purpose of the amateur radio service, the reason that we have access to all these airwaves, is because we provide value to the public. As a voluntary non-commercial communication service, particularly with respect to providing emergency communications, among a bunch of other things, advancing skills in both the communication and the technical phases of the art, expanding the reservoir of trained operators, and enhancing the international goodwill. And so, we have to be paying attention to our responsibility to the public with respect to providing emergency communications. But ham radio is a big hobby with lots of different fascinating facets. And not everybody who's a ham should want to be involved in emergency communications. But we're here for the ones that do want to be involved. So it's perfectly acceptable to be a DX operator or a contest operator or do POTA summits on the air, all sorts of things that you can do in amateur radio, be an experimenter and never talk on the radio, but play with the circuits. All of those are great. All of those are wonderful. We're here for, that small subset that is interested in preparing to provide disaster communications in an organized, structured way. Another thing I always like to start out with is the difference between emergencies and disasters. So emergencies happen every day. An emergency is when you need help to resolve an issue that's come up that involves the safety of people, property, animals, or the environment. And those things happen every day. We have public safety agencies who respond to those emergencies, along with a bunch of other government folks when they're needed. And they have all the communications resources they need to do that business. And in fact, not only do they not need us, but it would be against the FCC rules for them to helping, it would be against the rules for us to be helping them out doing their routine business. Okay, but a disaster is a man-made or natural event that results in death, injury, or property damage on a scale that overwhelms the ability of the community to respond. And so in that situation, there are often impacts to the communications infrastructure, and there are needs for communications between people, disaster responders, who don't normally need to talk to each other. That could be an agency that normally isn't involved in disasters, but they're needed for a particular event. It could be talking across jurisdictions. It could be feds deploying into our community from somewhere else and not knowing their way around, or having, local communications resources. In those situations, when there are all these emergent needs for communications channels that aren't normally needed, the hams are one of many resources that the disaster responders can call on to help. And we use the term MCOM, which is, a shortened form of emergency communications, really to cover both kinds of situations, the emergencies and the large disasters. Now, the ARRL has this slogan that you see all the time in their literature: when all else fails, amateur radio works, and they have various kinds of posters to promote that idea. And if I were to walk into the office of the guy who runs public safety communications for Montgomery County, and I know the fellow, and show him this poster, he would laugh in my face, because he has dedicated a career to being prepared with several levels of redundancy for any emergency situation that Montgomery County would need to face. And he has technology in depth, amazing depth in this area, in the DC area. And for us to say that, we think your stuff is all going to fail and then we're going to be the only ones to be able to communicate, that's pretty laughable to him. But there is a germ of a truth here. And, on that poster, you see a radio that's tuned to 146.52 megahertz. Not coincidentally, that is the simplex frequency that's been designated by the ARRL as the national calling frequency. And yes, two people with radios tuned to that frequency can talk to each other without any other infrastructure in between. Radio to radio over the airwaves, and that's something that's pretty hard to fail. But frankly, there's not all that much you can do with two FM radios on simplex. The range is pretty limited until you get an antenna up in the air. The bandwidth is limited to maybe 20 kilohertz of data, or as fast as you can talk and still be understood. So it's not a big pipe for information. But and there are situations where an emergency occurs, and it just so happens that a ham is available and has what is needed to get help where it's needed quickly. And those are always wonderful when they happen, but that's really not MCOM on an industrial scale. And the other point of this is that our infrastructure, and we have a lot of infrastructure in ham radio, is just as vulnerable to failure as everyone else's. So here's a few examples. You see a mast that's tipped over on the roof of a building. That happens to be a building in Rockville, and at least some members of this group know exactly where that picture was taken. That microwave dish that you see on the tilted over tower, it belongs to a group of hams. And I was involved in setting it up there. The antenna right above that happens to be a government repeater, and I don't even know which agency operates it. So most of this stuff in this picture is government equipment. And when the wind blows and something bad happens, to give you another example, you see that superstructure in the inset picture, or metal structure. I took this picture a couple of hours after I landed in Miami on the day after Hurricane Andrew went through, and we were driving down a road to the hard-hit part of Dade County, and I saw what looked to be the skeleton of a building. And a block further along, I got another glimpse of it behind some other buildings. And I said, that's a mighty big building. It's over a block long. And then we got another block, and I was still seeing the superstructure in between the buildings. It turned out it was a broadcast tower. There were two towers over 1,000 feet in Miami that together supported, all the TV stations, most of the FM broadcast stations, and most of the public safety and amateur radio repeaters. Both towers went down in the storm. And so, police, fire had basically no communications. The hams had no repeaters. By the time I got to where we were going, the fire department had taken their tallest ladder truck and set up a portable repeater in the parking lot of a firehouse in the affected area so that they had some kind of limited range repeater coverage of the disaster zone. And that was it for a couple of weeks for them. So anyway, and that other small picture there, that's not a new design for a satellite dish. That's another satellite dish that's had some wind damage. So, from my point of view, the slogan, when all else fails, is not a great way to sell our services. Being a force multiplier is a much more attractive proposition. Every successful system starts with an understanding of users' needs and requirements, which means talking to potential users before the fact, and establishing one's trustworthiness. And to give you some thoughts about that, we hams have a reputation, and it's a big hobby. There's a germ of truth here in some of these photos. This is what a lot of the public thinks of when they think of ham radio, and it's something that we need to overcome, because this is the hams that I know, and these hams I know to be very upright, capable, and generous people. So there you go. It happens to be in this photo, and this is not something I picked out. There are 3 NIH scientists. There's a high school math teacher. There's a professional firefighter / EMT, just in a small group of folks at a field day. When we go to the Red Cross or to Montgomery County Emergency Management, these people have really important responsibilities, and they're not going to rely on strangers, especially strangers who look like that, common public perception of amateur radio. So we have to kind of step up to the plate, and in fact, in Montgomery County, we have stepped up to the plate. So why amateur radio? To support, if you want to talk to one of these stakeholders about making use of our services. Well, so here are some of the reasons, and I don't need to read this whole slide. We have tech skills. We have people who are doctors, nurses, truck drivers, a wide variety of folks in all aspects of our community, and can bring their varied knowledge and skills to supporting communications need. And the cost to the government for making use of these services is pretty low, because we work for free. They sometimes need to invest some equipment, like installing an antenna on their building, so that we don't ahead of time, so that we don't have to be scrambling when they need us. But the cost is very low compared to most other telecom resources that they rely on. There are over 12,000 hams in Maryland, about 2,500 in Montgomery County. Did you know that? Of course, a lot of those folks are not active anymore, but they've kept their license. Only a tiny fraction of them is interested in MCOM, and that's fine. That's fine. To me, the bigger issue is that if you go a lot of different places around the country, places I've been, and you also see this if you look at other websites on the internet, and you'll find that there's a group of hams who call themselves the Amateur Radio Service. There's another group of hams in the same jurisdiction who call themselves Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, and there might even be a third group of hams who call themselves Auxiliary Communications Service. And in some of these jurisdictions, these 3 groups are competing against one another to do the same job for the same people. And that just frankly makes no sense to me. Now, way back in the old days, there were 2 big ham clubs in Montgomery County, MARC and what was called the Rock Creek Amateur Radio Association, or ARCARA. And those 2 clubs competed vigorously for members from the same community of hams. They had dueling repeaters, they had dueling field days, they had members of one club who would not speak to the members of the other club. And what a shame, what a shame. Well, it turns out that one of those groups has faded away, and now MARC is the dominant ham radio organization. And we have several other small ham clubs in the county, but they all get together. They all work together, and that's the way it should be. We divide and conquer is a good solution to some problems, but it's not a good solution to the ham radio community getting things done. And enough said about that. Actually, not enough said about that. I was going to mention that even today, in this part of Maryland, we have active ARRL ARES organizations in all the local counties. If you go over to the Eastern Shore, all the similar groups have branded themselves as RACES organizations. They're doing exactly the same thing, but the folks over there say we don't want to have anything to do with the ARRL. For myself, just being concerned with us being able to communicate following a disaster, one of these days, Ocean City is going to get hit hard by a hurricane, and we're going to need to talk to those folks. It doesn't matter to me at all that they call themselves RACES and we call ourselves ARES. Enough said about that. Okay. How can we use the resources of the community, of the ham radio community? Well, one of the things that we're good at is providing situational awareness or ground truth when something big happens. And the Skywarn program is a great example of that. When severe weather hits, and as recently as yesterday, Skywarn was activated, hams are providing information directly to the forecaster sitting at the forecast office over, Dulles Airport. There's a radio right in the middle of the room where the forecasters are sitting, and they can hear the ham radio as hams over the area are calling in, the severe weather observations, from across the forecast area. And if a major disaster happens, we can feed information like that into the Montgomery County Emergency Operations Center or anywhere else that needs that information. We have, people with eyes and ears all over the place, and many of them with specific training in how to report these kinds of observations, and are radio equipped and ready to spring into action. We're set up to provide point-to-point communications between hospitals, shelters, crossing jurisdictional lines. We have the ability to link disparate networks that don't share a common interface. We have the ability to deliver real-time video over microwave, over significant distances. We have the ability to send essentially email nationally and internationally without using the internet. And we have technical problem solving skills. So that's a pretty wide, deep set of resources that we offer. So let's talk now. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock here. What's likely to go wrong? Well, we're really lucky in the sense that nothing bad ever happens in the DC and the Mid-Atlantic area. This is a map of major declarations by county over a 13-year period. Over that period, there were 3 declared FEMA disasters in Montgomery County. The darker spots that you see on this map, and there are quite a few of those darker spots, had 10 to 12 declared disaster declarations over that same time period. And you can see, of course, large concentrations along the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic Coast, the Pacific Coast, a few down the Mississippi Valley, where flooding is a significant issue, and of course spots in areas that are very prone to tornadoes. It seems that about 85% of FEMA federal disasters have been due to weather, extreme weather. There's another significant fraction due to earthquakes and even a few volcanoes, but geologic scale events. And we've had a few, of course, that are due to terrorism acts. in this area, weather-related storms are few and far between and relatively minor impact. There have been a few that are more extreme, but we're in a pretty benign area, speaking of climate, and even in a more benign area in terms of earthquakes. We're not too far from the Atlantic coast, and we clearly could have a role to play with a major storm affecting the Delmarva Peninsula. And we're not too far from Appalachia, where flooding events have extremely severe impacts on relatively small communities. And some of us have deployed into parts of Appalachia that are only a few hours drive away to provide the communications from some of those small communities. And the small communities in West Virginia, they're all in the valleys where the rivers are. They're not on the tops of the mountains. And when you're in the valley and the phones don't work, it's pretty hard to use the satellites because the mountains on either side limit your view of the sky. The VHF, UHF communications don't work too well. There are repeaters that provide coverage of some of the areas, and those repeaters are vulnerable. And so HF is really the name of the game still in 2026 for some of those communities in an emergency. Okay, so what are some of the other issues though here that we could deal with? We have a major rail line going through our community. We have planes coming and going from 3 major airports flying over Montgomery County. So we could have a transportation incident that could be either mass casualty or chemical spill. There could be other mass casualty events in our area. We're very concerned, everyone's concerned these days about terrorism, nuclear, chemical, biological. I don't know if most of you probably are familiar with the term dirty bomb as a radiological event. A dirty bomb is defined as an explosion that is not a nuclear explosion, but one that's designed to spread radioactive material over an area, which causes harm to people and certainly creates a terror. It's a big concern in this area that a bad actor could do something targeting either DC or itself or one of the federal agencies that some of which are headquartered here in Montgomery County. So it's something that we think about a lot. And the question is, what would be the role of ham radio in a situation like that? So I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but that's something we think about. And just a few weeks ago, there was a significant cellular system outage. What happens if 70% of the people in Montgomery County pick up the phone and they can't call 911? And it's going to be a few days before that's corrected. And the big one of all, if we lose power for several months after a Carrington level event, at that point, ham radio is going to be playing a very important role, and there will be an overwhelming need for communications, far bigger than we can help with, but we will have a role to play. So, not to be too, scary about this whole thing, but as much as technology has advanced and we have instantaneous communications at our fingertips, literally, on our worst day, ham radio still has a role to play. How can we set ourselves up to be successful? And the good news is here in Montgomery County, we've already done it. We have a defined mission, and roles and responsibilities are written into Montgomery County's emergency operations plan. We Um, we have commitment. We have committed ourselves to Montgomery County government and the Red Cross to support them, and they in turn have committed to providing us with some, minimal resources that facilitates that. And they involve us with training. They provide training to our members. They involve us in exercises and also in planning that they conduct on a regular basis. So we've established that trust. I can tell you that one ham wandering where they're not supposed to be wandering in a building because they get curious can really put a dent in that trust very quickly, and it has happened over the years. And it's hard to regain trust when we have those kinds of breaches. So it's something that concerns us every day. We have developed an organization of hams and actually some non-hams in this area. We have some resources and we have some policies and procedures in place, although we still have work to do in that area. And let me just kind of skip ahead because I know I'm getting long-winded. So what is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service? That is the ARRL's organization of hams. Membership is open to everyone who's a ham. You don't have to be an ARRL member. The national organization divides ARES up by ARRL section, district, and city county. There are roles defined for leadership at the section, district, and local level, and also a role designed for an official emergency station, OAS, who is anyone who the emergency coordinator has appointed to do any role that they define. The role of the emergency coordinator is to coordinate, not direct. In other words, to match amateur radio resources with projected emergency communications needs. In Montgomery County, we have roughly 80 members on paper. About 50 of those have participated in at least one of our activities over the past year. A much smaller number are truly spending a lot of time with the program. But we'll take what we can get, even if you're interested and want to learn more and get on our mailing list. That's good enough for us to sign up. If you want to really get involved, we're going to expect you to undertake a little training, participate in some exercises and other kinds of activities. But the level of commitment to get started is just a matter of clicking a button on our website and giving us your email address and a few other bits of information. So what are the limitations of the Amateur Radio Emergency Service? There's little defined structure at the local level. Every ARES group in every jurisdiction has to figure out how to do it for themselves with very general guidance from the league. We are not a legal entity, which makes it difficult for us as a group to own equipment, raise funds, and do a lot of other things. And for me, one of the biggest problems with ARES is that you have to have a ham license to participate, and there's plenty of telecom service opportunities that don't require a ham license. Meshtastic being one example that some of you are playing around with. To address that gap, way back in the 80s, some folks, hams who were supporting the California Office of Emergency Services, envisioned an organization they called Auxiliary Communications Service, which starts with the Part 97 amateur radio principles, but it says you don't need to be a ham. There might be a need to set up a portable telephone system at a field location. Don't need a ham radio license to set up telephones. There's lots of communications on GMRS, FRS, Part 15 frequencies that don't require a ham license, but those kinds of resources can be very useful in disasters. So this concept that started in California sped around the country, and that's the basis really for MCACS. That we start from ham radio, but we go beyond ham radio in terms of the kinds of communications resources we use. And the focus of ACS is not that we're going to organize as or we're not going to deploy as a group when services are needed. We're training people to develop operating skills and technical skills so that they can deploy where needed. But we're not going to deploy like a platoon of soldiers with a management structure and logistics. When the emergency starts, basically our role as MCS is finished, and now our people and the resources that we've developed go forward to solve problems. And ACS in Montgomery County is a 501c3 Maryland corporation. That gives us the mechanism to own equipment, to accept tax deductible donations, and to do some other things that would be very hard to do as an ARES group. Same as Mark is a 501c3 corporation in Maryland. It really gives us some tools that are important. The mission of MCACS is to develop and maintain a cadre of volunteers who are qualified and equipped to provide a wide range of supplemental telecommunication services supporting our community during disasters and civil emergencies. You can look on our website to see how we do that. Interestingly enough, one of the requirements to be a full member in MCACS, we have different levels of membership, is to take a series of FEMA online courses in emergency management that are kind of the lingua franca for emergency management throughout this country and most of the world. And only about a third of our members have actually taken those 4 courses, which can be done in a few evenings online, on your own time. Fewer than 10 to 15 participants we have in most activities. So in reality, we're still pretty much ham radio centric, although we've done a few things that are outside of ham radio on Part 15 frequencies. We would like to do more with GMRS and FRS so we can engage more people in our group, but we're having trouble reaching out beyond the ham community, which is so familiar to us. MCACS operates this van, which has HF, VHF, and UHF radios on board. This series of photos was taken at a Red Cross exercise, and Paul there is operating the HF radio on WinLink. Some of you who use WinLink probably recognize the screens there. There's 2 meter, 220 and 440 radios in the center bay, and there's a bunch of network equipment, including internal and external Wi-Fi access points and a voice over IP phone switch on board the van as well. And well, let's see here. There's Alex filling out a Red Cross form that we sent via WinLink to a Red Cross supervisor at the regional Red Cross headquarters in Fairfax. And here, this is a photo that we've participated every year for the last, I don't know, probably 8, 9 years now, with a couple of years when we took off, couldn't do it during COVID. But last year, this past January, we were set up at the Public Safety Headquarters building out on Route 28 in Darnestown. We had an HF station in the tent that you see there, another HF station using the built-in radio in the van, several wire antennas that you can kind of see in the background there. In a lot of emergency situations, having a van sitting in the parking lot with communications is really not what our customers want. We need to be able to take the radio into the facility, set it up right next to where they're working so that they can turn to us to communicate and not have to walk out in the parking lot. talk to somebody in another facility. So there in the background, you see one of our GoKit radios. It's an HF station in a box with not only the radio, but all the accessories that you need to run the radio, including, headset and foot switch and the WinLink extra sound card interface and antenna tuner. Everything's in one box, all hooked up. When we walk into a facility, we can pop the covers off. We need one USB cable to connect everything in the box to the laptop. We need one cable going to an antenna, and we need one cable to the power source, which is under the table, and it's usually a deep cycle battery with a integrated battery charger. So, we can set this up in 10 minutes. It's not like going to field day with 3 cardboard boxes full of stuff and spending, a few hours hooking it all up and then realizing that you left a cable home and have to go back and get it. So that's really our focus. Last year, we did our winter field day on the beach at Assateague Island National Seashore. And because it was so far from home, we didn't have as many participants. But the good thing about doing a drill like this every now and again is when you go somewhere that it's more like a real deployment, because there's no opportunity to run home and get the stuff that you forgot. You have, in a disaster, you make do with the stuff that you brought. So doing something like this teaches us, it's a good test of our skills. This is a map of the Marine Corps Marathon course last year. Over 40,000 runners participated. The hams are not just providing backup communications here. We're the primary network for medical related communications, supporting the runners as well as the general public. And we also provide extra trained eyes and ears on the course in support of the event organizers, including watching out for bad stuff that might be coming to the fore. So we look for 120 hams to support this event. Last year we struggled, made do with just shy of 100. We'd like a few more of you to come with us in November. This is the biggest of the public service communications events in the air in the DC area, but there are lots of other smaller scale events that we support. And, Paul Fitzgerald does a great job of organizing the ham support for a lot of those events. We support some events in other jurisdictions as well. Good practice for emergency communications, a good service to the public today. And it's actually very satisfying and a lot of fun to be involved in something like this. In most of these situations, all you need is an HT and preferably a headset. Maybe an extra battery and a J-pole antenna, but you don't need much. We'll train you. We'll supply you equipment if you need that. We want you to get involved, and it's really a very cool thing to be involved in. Just one other thing for that particular event, MCACS has a portable UHF repeater. And for the marathon last year, we set it up on the roof of a building in Roslyn, directly overlooking the Marine Corps Marathon. I'm sorry, the Iwo Jima Memorial. The roof here is 250 feet above ground level, 360 feet mean sea level, and this repeater provided coverage of most of the race course. But especially the end part of the course where most of the injuries occur. So one of our many physical assets that we put to use, and it doesn't take very long to set something up like this because it's engineered. You can see the concrete blocks that we brought to provide ballast for the antenna, but what you probably can't see is the wire rope that was tying the antenna mast to a building structural member, so that if a thunderstorm came through with 60 or 70-mile winds at 360 feet above ground, that even if the antenna blew over, it wasn't going off the roof. So, engineered solutions rather than just cobbling things together. This is the station at one of our 3 Montgomery County hospitals that has a permanently installed ham station. We have at this hospital, and actually at Silver Spring as well, Holy Cross, we have 2 TMD 710 Kenwood radios. The radios here are actually mounted in a wall cabinet up. You can't see it out of the range of the picture. Everything is pre-wired again so that we can walk in, connect the antenna cables, which are normally disconnected for antenna lightning safety, plug in the antennas, turn on the power supply, and we're on the air. And the system runs off of the hospital's emergency power system. And we have installations at 3 of our county hospitals, plus the NIH Club has a station on the Bethesda campus that's tied into the hospital. We're looking to get a couple of the other hospitals on board with this program. There's a similar kind of a station, as I mentioned earlier, at the Weather Service Forecast Office for the Baltimore-Washington region, and you already know about Skywarn, and another night I guess we'll have Jerry talk about that. We are doing things with microwave. We've set up what you would call a metropolitan area network using microwave dishes on top of various tall buildings and a few towers that spans the DC metro area. And basically anything that you can do over the internet, you can do over this ham-operated microwave network that's completely independent of the internet. We have a voice over IP phone switch integrated into this network, and there are IP phones at a number of the sites. And we'd like to get more hospitals and EOCs connected up to this network. It takes a lot of effort to do that. We could use help with that project. Okay. And my last slide, I'm sure Alex is happy to hear that. And probably all of you, my last slide is, part of the ACS concept is we don't buy radios, we build communication systems. And similarly, it's nice that many hams are expert radio operators, but in order to serve the folks who are responding to a disaster, it really helps if you know something about their world and their language, because there's a lot of words that have a special meaning in the emergency management community, and understanding the lingo helps you better to convey it when you're the one that's sending the message to somebody else. Words that have plain language synonyms, those synonyms may not work when you're dealing with some of these specialty terms. So the more you know about the emergency management community and how they operate, the better support we can provide to them. Okay, enough said. Questions? I see a hand from Fred. Let me go ahead and stop this sharing slides.
Yeah, I was just going to say, some people may ask the question, they've heard the term RACES before, and I don't think you really mentioned it. Did you want to comment on that at all?
Well, probably half of the folks in the club have heard of RACES, maybe more. RACES is an acronym for the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, which is a communication service defined by the FCC that is parallel to the amateur radio service or the family radio service or general mobile radio service. It is a legal concept that the FCC developed back in the middle of the Cold War. The idea being that if the U.S. goes to war for a variety of reasons, the FCC will have to shut down the amateur radio service. And so we will all lose our operating privileges if and when that should occur. But everyone recognized that hams could play a role in providing civil emergency communications following a declaration of war. So the question is, how do you allow that to happen if you're shutting down the amateur radio service? And the FCC's answer was to create this parallel service that's defined in the FCC rules and regulations that allow hams to cross-register in the radio amateur civil emergency service. And those hams who are cross-registered and signed up with their local emergency management organization can continue to operate, not using their ham license, but using their RACES operating privileges and their ham station. And the interesting thing is that this RACES is still on the FCC rules and regulations, but it has never actually ever been called into action because the U.S. hasn't experienced a declared war since World War II, and we haven't had to shut down the amateur radio service. But that could still happen in the future. So in Montgomery County, the way we've handled that is in our bylaws and our agreement with the Montgomery County government. What they've done is they've recognized that any member of MCACS is considered to be registered with the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service Program for the purposes of complying with Part 97 RACES rules. So, when you're a signed up member of MCACS, basically you have the credentials that would allow you to operate a RACES radio station in the event of a war when that might be needed. Pretty wild and esoteric.
Yeah, sort of anachronistic too.
It is, but one could foresee a situation where we might need it in the future. So it's there. It's a tool in the toolbox. Now, in a lot of the country, including on our own Delmarva Eastern Shore, groups of hams who signed up to be these RACES volunteers with their local emergency management organization, they banded together and formed an organization that they call the RACES Group. And so there's no mention of RACES organizations in the FCC rules. It's something that we hams invented because, when we sign up to do this role, we like to work together. So a RACES organization is effectively, it does exactly the same things as an ARES organization and does pretty much the same things as the hams in an ACS organization. And it hardly matters to me what name you put on your organization, because we all need to work together to do what needs to be done. And we've been very fortunate in the Mid-Atlantic area that we haven't had these competing organizations grow up and fight with each other. We've managed to keep it together so we're all one more or less happy family. And we talk to each other even if we have different names for our organizations.
Can I ask a question about the climate map you had?
Yeah,
just
sure.
out of curiosity. So there was a cluster of frequent FEMA declared disaster areas up in the Northeast around Maine. And north of us, What would that be up there? I mean, that they're not getting hurricanes or anything. What's happening up in Maine?
Well, there have been they have winter storm events, including not so including this past winter, that create massive emergencies and damage that requires a federal declaration. They are subject to northeasters, which are kind of meteorologically, a big northeaster is not so much different than a hurricane in terms of the amount of wind and destruction it does, and they've been subject to a number of flooding events stemming from hurricanes that were degraded to tropical storms by the time they got to New England, but still caused immense flooding and in some cases wind and other kinds of damage. So there's actually quite a bit of vulnerability in New England
Wow.
to weather events.
Yeah, and I just want to say that your point about local clubs helping each other and getting along, relationships are critical. If you don't know the people that live next door to you, but you need their help, but you don't have their phone number because you don't know who they are, that's terrible. I mean, you need to all work together. And I know that the people up in Howard County and in Frederick County, great guys. And they always reach out. They always invite us. By the way, there's a Fred Fest coming up on the 21st. Everybody should go and support our friends at Frederick Amateur Radio Club. But they reach out to each other, and I just think that's a terrific thing, very important. And so that's a great point that you made. Thank you.
Yeah, the emergency coordinators in the DC area have formed a council. The DC area, Virginia is in a different ARRL section from Maryland and DC. And so, if you wanted if I want to talk to my counterpart in Arlington, under some set of rules, I might have to go through my section emergency coordinator to the Virginia SEC and then down to the district SEC to get to the guy in Arlington. So we've formed a council with the support of our section level leadership so that we can talk to each other regularly once a month. And I actually think that we really need a council of clubs in this area as well. We used to have that as the Foundation for Amateur Radio, and old timers remember that it provided a lot of value to us. And I don't know how it ever died away, but we need to reinvent it.
We do. Well, tonight we have Ron, president of the Damascus Emergency Communications Team, with us. We all support each other. And thank you, Ron, for coming tonight. And we do our field day together. We've done it together now. I think this is going to be our 14th year, Ron. 13th or 14th, who knows anymore? Stop counting. But those kind of relationships are just wonderful. I mean, first of all, you feel like family. It's not just a professional relationship. You become good friends and you grow together and you bond together. It's just a great and because you're sharing a common interest, common bond. So it's just really important. And thank you, Ron, and thank you for everything you do. You guys are just awesome and one of our very dear friends in the amateur radio community, as you are, Al, with MC, although you're a member of our club too, so you can't hide that. But with MCACS and I encourage people to join Ron, join Al. There's a lot of cross fertilization. Our members are members of at least 3, 4 amateur radio clubs. There's nothing that says you only have to be a member of one. And it's better if you are a member of a bunch because you know each other, it's like being a liaison and you know what everybody else is doing. It's just a really important thing. What do you think, Al?
I agree. We also have the NIH club, that partners with us on a lot of stuff.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I like that idea of having a community. There was a meeting a couple of years ago. I don't want to keep everybody here, but there was a meeting a couple of years ago where we brought in club presidents and emergency coordinators from the different regions. Remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was really good, but it just happened that one time.
We need to find someone who will put some energy into it and be a spark plug. And that's the hardest problem that we face is getting people to take the time to get something like this going.
Yeah. Fred?
Yeah, I was going to say there used to be an organization. I don't remember their name, something or other council, and they regularly had an annual get together where they talked about different things I remember that's where I learned a lot about the different battery technologies. Um, I just can't remember. I don't even know if some of the people are around. Do you remember what that was, Al? It was
Yeah,
something
yeah, I think you're thinking
like
about the National Capital ARES Council.
that's what it was. Yeah.
And we held um, basically a Saturday of seminars. And interestingly enough, that organization, which was started by our own Ross Merlin, who many of you know, and a guy who was at the time the Fairfax County EC. That organization um, eventually was disbanded because the ARRL headquarters said that it was an unauthorized use of the ARES name. And again, because we were parts of two different ARRL sections, someone in the leadership hierarchy objected to us talking to each other directly without going through management, and it's such a shame. And I'm sure that that if you peel back the layers, it probably stemmed from a personality conflict between two individuals who threw their weight enough around to ruin things for everybody else. That's how most of these things ebb and flow, and you see the same thing uh, in all sorts of communities that people organize themselves and then get into fights, and it's just so sad, but it just seems to be a part of humanity.
In fact, you mentioned about how trying to get amateur radio back into the hospitals again. There was at one time a very formalized thing where there were radios at all the hospitals, and they would every month have a drill where all of them will get together. But again, some conflicts between certain people sort of caused a problem, and that eventually went away. So it's good to see that we're trying to get it all back again.
Yeah, and as it happens, just today I was conversing in email with someone at the Adventist hospital system, and we may be there's at least interest in setting up, replacing those amateur stations and starting over again in the Adventist system. So that's it's not a done deal yet, but we're actively talking to them, and I hope it comes to fruit.
Any more questions? Okay, well, Al, terrific presentation. Thank you. And I hope people, look up the website and support Al's great work in our county. It's invaluable. Nobody knows you until everybody needs you, right, Al?
Well, we try not to make it like that. We try to reach out ahead of time.
That's right.
And,
That's
and yeah, absolutely.
okay. All righty. So, thank you. And I think we can stop the recording now if we